This audio program is presented by Audible.com. Audible, audio that speaks to you wherever you are.
5 billion reasons why you should listen to this audiobook. A lot has happened to us all since 1987. That's the year The Art of the Deal was published and became the best-selling business book of the decade, with over 3 million copies in print. Business rule number 1. If you don't tell people about your success, they probably won't know about it. A few months ago, I picked up The Art of the Deal, skimmed a bit, and then read the first and last paragraphs. I realized that after 17 years, they still rang true. I could have written these words yesterday. First paragraph. I don't do it for the money. I've got enough, much more than I'll ever need. I do it to do it. Deals are my art form. Other people paint beautifully on canvas or write wonderful poetry. I like making deals, preferably big deals. That's how I get my kicks. Last paragraph. Don't get me wrong. I also plan to keep making deals, big deals, and right around the clock. It's now 2004. I'm still making deals around the clock, and I still don't do it for the money. I don't think you should do it for the money either. Money is not an end in itself, but it's sometimes the most effective way to help us realize our dreams. So if you've got big dreams and you're looking for a way to make them happen, this audiobook is for you. How to get rich. That's what I decided to call it, because whenever I meet people, that's usually what they want to know from me. You ask a baker how he makes bread. You ask a billionaire how he makes money. Sure, there have been countless how-to-get-rich books written by millionaires. Billionaire authors are harder to find. Billionaire authors with interests in real estate, gaming, sports, and entertainment are rarer still. And billionaire authors with their own Manhattan skyscrapers and hit primetime television series are rarest of all. I'm pretty sure I'm the only one, though Oprah could give me a run for the money if she ever decides to write another book and get into real estate. Business rule number 2. Keep it short, fast, and direct. The following will be straightforward and succinct, but don't let the brevity of these passages prevent you from savoring the profundity of the advice you're about to receive. These stories and words of wisdom have been distilled from almost 30 years at the top. So here it comes, the scoop from the Donald. After you make your first billion, don't forget to send me a thank you note. You know the address.
Simon & Schuster Audio presents Trump, How to Get Rich by Donald J. Trump with Meredith McIver. Read by Barry Bostwick with an introduction by Donald J. Trump.
Part 1. The Donald J. Trump School of Business and Management. Be a general. I am the chairman and president of the Trump Organization. I like saying that because it means a great deal to me. There are almost 20,000 members of this organization at this point. I did a print ad once in which I declared, "I only work with the best." That statement still stands. More and more, I see that running a business is like being a general. Calling the shots carries a great deal of responsibility not only for yourself, but for your troops. Your employees' lives, to a large extent, are dependent on you and your decisions. Bad strategy can end up affecting a lot of people. This is where being a leader takes on a new dimension. Every decision you make is an important one, whether there are 20,000 people working for you or just one. If you are careful when finding employees, management becomes a lot easier. I rely on a few key people to keep me informed. They know I trust them, and they do their best to keep that trust intact. For example, when I need to know something about my casinos and hotels in Atlantic City, I know I can call up Mark Brown, my CEO, and get a fast and informed answer. If I call Laura Cordovano over at Trump Park Avenue and ask about sales, she'll give it to me exactly as it is. If I call Alan Weisselberg, my CFO, he'll tell me what I need to know in 20 words or less. My senior counsel and apprentice advisor, George Ross, can do it in 10 words or less. Find people who suit your business style, and you'll have fewer problems to deal with as time goes on. Good people equals good management, and good management equals good people. They have to work together, or they won't work together for very long. I've seen good management get by with mediocre people, and I've also seen excellent people get stuck in the mires of bad management. The good managers will eventually leave, followed by the good workers, and you will be left with a team that gets along because they're all mediocre. Save yourself time by getting the best people you can. Sometimes this can mean choosing attitude over experience and credentials. Use your creativity to come up with a good mix. Creative people rarely need to be motivated. They have their own inner drive that refuses to be bored. They refuse to be complacent. They live on the edge, which is precisely what is needed to be successful and remain successful. One of my former employees was in charge of a new project. He had done a thorough and acceptable job, but I felt that something was missing. It wasn't fantastic, which, knowing his capabilities, it should have been. I decided to challenge his creative ego by mentioning that it was fine, but seemed to lack inspiration. I politely asked him whether he was genuinely interested in the project, and suggested that perhaps that might be the problem. Well, the guy went ballistic on me. He was deeply insulted. And as you can probably guess, the revision he turned in was terrific. The difference between the first draft and the final version was incredible. I didn't slam the guy because he was usually demanding of himself and had never let me down. But I had to give him a jolt. Generals motivate their soldiers. They inspire them when it is necessary. They do the same for the highest-ranking officers. We all need a boost now and then. Learn how to tailor your method to the personalities you are managing. Keep the big picture in mind while attending to the daily details. This can seem like a balancing act, but it is absolutely necessary for success in running a company. Stay focused. In the 1980s, I was riding high. After learning the essentials of real estate development from my father, Fred, a builder in Queens and Brooklyn, I'd become a major player in Manhattan, developing Trump Tower, the Grand Hyatt Hotel, and many other top-tier properties. I had a yacht, a plane, a best-selling book. One magazine headline said, "Everything he touches turns to gold," and I believed it. I'd never known adversity. I went straight from Wharton to wealth. Even in down markets, I bought properties inexpensively and made a lot of money. I began to think it was easy. In the late 80s, I lost focus. I'd fly off to Europe to attend fashion shows, and I wasn't looking at the clothing. My lack of attention was killing my business. Then the real estate market crashed. I owed billions upon billions of dollars, $9.2 billion to be exact. That's $9,200 million. I've told this story many times before, but it bears repeating. In the midst of the crash, I passed a beggar on the street and realized he was worth $9.2 billion more than I was. I saw a lot of my friends go bankrupt, never to be heard from again. The media had me for lunch. Forbes, Businessweek, Fortune, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, they all published major stories about my crisis, and a lot of people seemed to be happy about it. I'll never forget the worst moment. It was 3 a.m. Citibank phoned me at my home in Trump Tower. They wanted me to come over to their office immediately to negotiate new terms with some foreign banks, 3 of the 99 banks to whom I owed billions. It's tough when you have to tell a banker that you can't pay interest. They tend not to like those words. An ally at Citibank suggested that the best way for me to handle this difficult situation was to call the banks myself, and that's exactly what they wanted me to do. At 3 o'clock on a cold January morning in the freezing rain. There were no cabs, so I walked 15 blocks to Citibank. By the time I got there, I was drenched. That was a low point. There were 30 bankers sitting around a big table. I phoned one Japanese banker, then an Austrian banker, and then a third banker from a country I can no longer remember. In The Art of the Deal, I had warned readers never to personally guarantee anything. Well, I hadn't followed my own advice. Of the $9.2 billion I owed, I'd personally guaranteed $1 billion. I was a schmuck. But I was a lucky schmuck, and I wound up dealing with some understanding bankers who worked out a fair deal. After being the king of the 80s, I survived the early 90s, and by the mid to late 90s, I was thriving again. But I learned my lesson. I work as hard today as I did when I was a young developer in the 1970s. Don't make the mistake I did. Stay focused. Maintain your momentum. William Levitt, the master builder of Levittown, taught me the true meaning of momentum. In the 1950s, he was the king. No detail was too small for his attention. He would personally collect stray nails and extra chips of wood from building sites to make sure his construction crews used all available materials. He sold his company in 1956 to ITT for $100 million, which is equivalent to billions today. Then he made some terrible mistakes. He retired. He married the wrong woman. He moved to the south of France and lived on the Riviera with his new boat and his new wife. One day, ITT called. The executives in charge of the conglomerate had no aptitude for home building. They had bought huge tracts of land but didn't know how to get them zoned, so they sold it back to Levitt, who thought he'd gotten a great deal. He went back into business, and he proceeded to go bankrupt. I saw William Levitt at a cocktail party in 1994, 2 weeks before he died. He was standing by himself in a corner, looking defeated. I didn't know him well, but I approached him, hoping to acquire some wisdom from the master. "Mr. Levitt," I said, "how are you doing?" "Not good, Donald, not good." Then he said the words I'll never forget. "I lost my momentum. I was out of the world for 20 years. I came back, and I wasn't the same." No matter how accomplished you are, no matter how well you think you know your business, you have to remain vigilant about the details of your field. You can't get by on experience or smarts. Even the best surgeons need to be retrained regularly to stay current on the latest research and procedures. No matter what you're managing, don't assume you can glide by. Momentum is something you have to work at to maintain. Get a great assistant. Surround yourself with people you can trust. I often say it's good to be paranoid, but not when it comes to your home team. Ask God for a great assistant. No joke. A great one can make your life a whole lot easier, or in my case, almost manageable. Norma Forderer has been with me for 23 years. If you want to know what a great guy I am, just ask her, but not on a Friday. Handling me, the office, and several hundred calls a week isn't easy. She's as tough and smart as she is gracious. She's also indefatigable, which helps a lot if you work for me. My phones are so busy that I require 2 executive assistants, and they never stop. They alone handle, on the average, more than 1,250 calls a week. They are not only efficient and fast, but they are also very pleasant and beautiful young women. You don't have to be beautiful to work for me. Just be good at your job. I've been accused of admiring beautiful women. I plead guilty. But when it comes to the workplace, anyone who is beautiful had better have brains, too. You need competent people with an inherent work ethic. I'm not a complacent person, and I can't have a complacent staff. I move forward quickly, and so must they. Once I wanted to know how fast a new employee could work, so I told him I was leaving in 15 minutes and needed something done within that time. I wasn't actually going anywhere, but sure enough, I had what I needed in 15 minutes. Machiavellian? Maybe, but both of us learned something that day. One final piece of advice on assistants, which I learned from experience and which, I admit, may not be as relevant to your career as it's been to mine. Find a receptionist who can speak English. We had a breathtaking European beauty out front who could easily rival Ingrid Bergman in her heyday, but I discovered that her ability to recognize well-known people in the United States was limited to myself and maybe President Bush. She wasn't so familiar with the likes of Hugh Grant, Reggie Jackson, George Steinbrenner, Jack Welch, Paul Anka, Mohammed Al-Fayed, Regis Philbin, or Tony Bennett. Their calls never got through to me, and their names were placed on her psycho list. But you should have seen her. What a knockout. She's since moved on to better career opportunities, but we'll never forget her. Neither will anyone who ever called in, or tried to. Remember, the buck starts here. Set the standard. Don't expect your employees to work harder than you do. In my case, I don't have to worry about that because I work 7 days a week and love almost every minute of it. But also realize that your company will sometimes function as an extended and dysfunctional family. It's only natural, considering that people often spend more waking hours with coworkers than they do with their families. A visitor in my office once mentioned that the goings-on there reminded him of a family fight in progress. I will admit that the volume level gets high now and then, and he wasn't far off in his assessment. But if you want smooth sailing every day, move to the Mediterranean. Winners see problems as just another way to prove themselves. Problems are never truly hardships to them, and if you haven't got any problems, then you must not have a business to run. Regard your company as a living, breathing organism, because that's what it is. Those figures you see on your spreadsheets will reflect the health of that organism. Watch out for bad cells while allowing good cells to flourish. Growth is an indication of life, so keep your organization moving forward at all times. Having a passion for what you do is crucial. If you can't get excited about what you're doing, how can you expect anyone else to? If your employees can see and feel your energy, it is bound to affect them. Don't intimidate people. If you do, you'll never get a straight answer from anyone, and you'll be defeating your own purpose. I keep my door open, and my people know I'm available as well as approachable. We don't have chat fests, but whatever needs to be done gets accomplished, and quickly. Remember that your organization is your organization. That sounds simplistic, but bottom line, it's your ballgame. The strategy is up to you, and so are the results. Remember Harry Truman's famous words, which he kept on his desk in the Oval Office? The buck stops here? I keep a similar quote on my desk. It reads, "The buck starts here." Don't equivocate. If you equivocate, it's an indication that you're unsure of yourself and what you're doing. It's also what politicians do all the time, and I find it inappropriate, insulting, and condescending. I try not to do it. Fortunately, I don't have to try too hard at this one because I've been known to be on the blunt and fast side at times, which is good. I once asked an executive in my organization to give me a synopsis of a new development we were considering. He'd been to the city in question, had spent some time there, and had done some careful investigating. He went on to describe the merits of the site, the pitfalls, the good things, the bad things, the pros, the cons, on in great detail. He must have talked for 10 minutes straight. Judging from what he was telling me, there were just as many reasons to drop the project as there were reasons to jump right in and get going. It was like a tied game with no overtime. I asked him more questions, and we ended up exactly where we were before. He was on both sides of the fence at once, and didn't seem to want to take a stand either way. This guy had a lot of experience and a good track record, so finally I asked him what he thought of the project in 10 words or less. "It stinks," he said. He had 8 words left, but he didn't need them. Ask yourself 2 questions. Number 1, is there anyone else who can do this better than I can? That's just another way of saying know yourself and know your competition. If your competition is better than you are, you need to offer some quality they lack. Number 2, what am I pretending not to see? We can all get swept up in the euphoria of a creative moment, or what former President Richard Nixon's speechwriters used to call the lift of a dream. Before the dream lifts you into the clouds, make sure you've looked hard at the facts on the ground. Bullshit will only get you so far. I think it's funny that the phrase most closely associated with me these days is, "You're fired," because the truth is, although I've had to fire people from time to time, it's not a big part of my job. I much prefer keeping loyal and hard-working people around for as long as they'd like to be here. There's a wonderful lady in her 90s, Amy Lewerson, who worked for my father and still reports to work every day at our Brooklyn office. Here at the Trump Organization, Helen Raycotts has worked for me from the day I moved to Manhattan, and she still puts in long hours every week. She is 82. Once I delayed firing someone for 2 years because this guy always had such a great line of bullshit every time I came close to the topic. No matter what was going on, he had some huge deal lined up that was just about to come through. He managed to string me along for 2 solid years, and I believed him every time, or wanted to. Finally, I was forced to realize that his claims were bogus, but I gave him every chance before finally axing him. Unless your boss is a total sadist, he or she doesn't want to fire you or cause hardship to your family. If you think you're in danger of being fired, take control of the situation and ask your boss for a meeting. Make sure you ask for the meeting at the right time. Tell your boss you want to make sure you are communicating and doing your job to everyone's satisfaction. Of course, if your boss is a sadist or just a lousy communicator, you've still got a problem. In that case, fire your boss and get a better job. There's no sense in trying to cope with a bad situation that will never improve. I never try to dissuade people from quitting. If they don't want to be here, I don't want them to be here either. No one has ever come to me with an ultimatum. People see how it works here, and if it doesn't suit them, they move on. Sometimes it happens quickly. A qualified and experienced receptionist worked here for a grand total of 6 hours. She realized right away that the pace just wasn't suited to her, and she very politely told us so and left. I appreciated her quick thinking and efficient decision-making skills. She'll have a successful career somewhere else. Every new hire is a gamble. Some people give such great interviews that you're ready to make them vice presidents on the spot, until you realize that their true talent is simply giving a great interview. That's why, in a sense, every new hire is a gamble. Impressive credentials don't always add up to a great performance or a good fit. Non-existent credentials don't necessarily mean a no talent. Being circumspect helps a lot and keeps you from being surprised. People can offer an interesting mix of pros and cons. Time will do the weeding out for you. All you have to do is pay attention. What I look for in employees is a sense of responsibility that goes beyond what is merely sufficient. Some people do the bare minimum, and some people will actually be concerned about the organization as a whole. They see themselves as having a direct relationship to the success or failure of the company they work for. They believe they are important, and their work shows it. If you can instill this sense of worth in your employees, you will have a tip-top team working for you. People who take pride in their work are the kind you want to have around, and the kind I like to keep around. I especially like employees who spend, and more importantly save, the company's money as if it was their own. Companies suffer when employees don't make enough of an effort to control costs. The employees who feel a personal responsibility for their budgets, who view the company's bottom line as an extension of their own personal savings account, are often the ones who get the best results. If you let your boss know that you're watching out for his or her bottom line, you'll always be appreciated. I respect employees who can think on their feet. So does George Ross, my senior counsel. His assistant, Carol Berkowitz, was helping out at the front desk one day when she received a call from a stranger who said she was about to commit suicide. Carol deemed the call credible and took a few moments to listen to the distressed woman. Carol asked her where she was from, and the woman replied that she lived in Southern California, not far from the beach. Carol responded, "You live in California, near the beach. Do you know how cold it is in New York today? It's 8 degrees outside, and that's without the wind chill. I almost froze just getting to work. If I were you, I'd go out right now, take a long walk on the beach, and sit in the sun for a while. That's what I'd do if I were you." The woman instantly calmed down and thanked Carol for being so nice to her. That's the kind of person we like to have around. A certain amount of personal ambition is necessary, but not to the point where it undermines the common goal of the company. If your group can't work together, you won't accomplish much. I don't like backstabbing. It's not necessary, and it's insulting to me. I have eyes and ears and instincts, too. I can assess people and situations for myself. If people have time to be petty, it's an indication they're not busy enough with their work. You can't expect to be a valuable employee if you don't make yourself valuable. Think about it. What do you contribute to the welfare of the organization? Are you instrumental in keeping it humming and moving forward? Do you work wholeheartedly or half-heartedly? Are you just going through the motions and hoping no one will notice? The only person you ever fool is yourself. You can't fool others, even though you might think you can. A lot of people say they're going through the motions because their position isn't challenging or rewarding and there's no room to grow. It's a dead-end situation. That might very well be. If so, look elsewhere for a company that could offer you a promotion in your particular area of interest or expertise. There are times when you should move on, and situations in which the only way up is out. Ideas are welcome, but make sure you have the right one. If you run a company, make yourself accessible to your employees. If they feel they can bring ideas to you, they will. If they feel they can't, they won't. You might miss out on a lot of good ideas, and pretty soon you might be missing a lot of employees. I allow people to run their ideas by me. I don't have a lot of time, so they have to be prepared and succinct. I'm sure that's the protocol for any busy CEO. So if you're going to be bold enough to present your idea, make it as clear as possible and don't take it casually. Think of it as a presentation that could cost you a lot of money if you were to lose the client. Your boss's time is important, and you won't win any points by wasting it. Learn to recognize the fine line between being pushy and being intelligently assertive. It can be an issue of timing. Pay attention to what's happening around you and pace yourself according to that rhythm. I try to develop a tempo when I'm working. Someone who interrupts it is not going to receive a warm welcome. Also, remember this. The boss has the big picture. You don't. So if your idea doesn't meet with hurrahs, it could very well be that a similar idea is already in development, or that your idea is not in step with plans that have already been made. This shouldn't discourage you because your initiative will always be noticed. But recognize when not to press an issue and don't expect a lengthy explanation of why. I like people who don't give up, but merely being a pest is detrimental to everyone. Once again, fine-tune your discernment. Know when to ease up. Keep your antennae up for another idea and a more appropriate opportunity. Sometimes we hesitate with good reason. There was one former employee who I liked a lot, but he reminded me of a jumping bean. He couldn't keep still for more than 3 seconds at a time. Even riding in the car with him became an ordeal because being in an enclosed space seemed to warm him up even more, and then he'd really get going. I finally learned to avoid him as much as possible, and that's too bad, because he was a great guy. But enough is enough. Too much will cause people to tune you out or wish that you would move to another state. Last I heard, the jumping bean was living in Montana. I only hope they have enough space there to contain him. And every time I hear about UFO sightings in Montana, I have to laugh. I know who it is. One last thing. If your boss says no to an idea, pay attention. Most likely, there's a good reason. No one disregards a terrific idea. It just might not be the right terrific idea for the company you're with. Maybe you're meant to go off on your own as an entrepreneur. Let that be an indication to you. It could be the beginning of your career rather than the end of it. Focus on the talent instead of the title. People who work for me know there's a lot more to me than my public persona. I'm not one-dimensional, and if you realize that the people around you aren't either, you'll be utilizing the hidden potential that just about everyone has. Whether they want to use it or not is up to them to a certain extent, but it's also up to a leader to recognize it, or at least to give it a chance to unfold. Most people don't like to stagnate, and if you want to keep your company moving forward, look around you now and then for fresh possibilities within your organization. Never let someone's job title be the sole indication of their worth. People at the Trump Organization have transcended their positions on many occasions. Matthew Calamari, the Executive Vice President of Operations, started as a security guard. After getting to know Matthew, I realized he had a lot more to offer than his job title warranted, and he has proven me right. He's a dedicated and trustworthy worker, and any CEO in his right mind would want to have him around. As an executive vice president, he is in charge of building operations and runs my entire security organization. He is in charge of major building projects with his brother Michael and Andy Weiss. Their most notable recent accomplishment is the new building on the site of the former Delmonico Hotel at Park Avenue and 59th Street. I'm calling it Trump Park Avenue. Catchy, right? Vinny Stelio, who was hired by Matthew Calamari, started as my bodyguard and is now a vice president. He has just what it takes to be an effective executive, which was clear to me, if not immediately to him. Vinny would often drive executives, architects, and contractors up to Westchester to look at developments I was building. Now they report to him. I am perhaps the largest owner of land in Westchester County, and now it's Vinny who keeps his eye on it all. John Tutelo, president of Trump Model Management, our modeling agency, started as a booker and now has what many guys would consider a dream job. Meredith McIver, who made the writing of this book a pleasure instead of a headache, started out as a media assistant. I recognize that her talents encompass much more. Of course, it takes talent to deal with me and everyone else every day, but especially me. I could have hired an outside collaborator to help me with this book, but why spend time looking outside the organization when you have all the people you need right beside you? Very often your resources are greater than you might think. I don't like it when people underestimate me, and I try not to underestimate anyone else either. People are multifaceted, and it's important to let them function in a way that will allow them to shine. Most people would rather succeed than fail, but sometimes the leader has to be the catalyst for putting success into their personal vocabulary. In other words, try to see beyond a person's title. You can find talent in unlikely places. Manage the person, not the job. I once heard a story about a guy who owned an advertising agency. There was one writer who drove the other writers crazy because he would appear to be doing nothing in his office. He made no attempt to look busy. Finally, his colleagues complained to his boss about his laziness. The boss suddenly perked up and asked, "How long has he been this way?" One of the other writers answered, "For weeks and weeks he sits there and does zip. It's like he's in a coma." The boss said, "I want all of you to be quiet and not to disturb him, and every now and then ask if you can get him some coffee or some lunch or run some errands for him." Needless to say, the employees were deflated and started grumbling. Then the boss explained his rationale. "Listen, the last time he was acting this way and the time before that, he came up with ideas worth many millions of dollars. So when I tell you not to disturb him, I have a reason for it." People have different ways of achieving results. I enjoy figuring out how each of my key employees excels. If people are your resource, you'd better try to learn something useful about them. Being able to do so is what makes a good manager a great one. Some people respond well to the fear factor. Ever hear this exchange? Question: How long have you been working here? Answer: Ever since they threatened to fire me. Well, it applies to some employees. Fortunately, I seem to attract people who enjoy working, but now and then a few slugs will show up, and the loss of face or job can be a good motivator for many. That said, it will always work against you to demoralize your employees in any way. I can be tough, but most people will admit I'm fair. You can crush people if you don't weigh your words carefully. Your power as a leader should be used in the most positive way, which sometimes calls for a great deal of restraint as well as patience. I have to laugh when I hear people say, "I can't wait until I'm the big shot so I can order everyone around." It doesn't quite work that way. Abraham Lincoln made an appropriate remark that is pertinent to management. Nearly all men can stand adversity, but if you want to test a man's character, give him power. Keep your door open. I'm always taken aback when people say, Oh, he's got it made, as if that's the end of the conversation about a person. They seem to be saying that the person can just check out and coast because he's already arrived. To me, arriving means something that is about to begin. Graduation from college is a beginning, not an ending. Each success is the beginning of the next one. Learning is a new beginning we can give ourselves every day. A know-it-all is like a closed door. Everyone who knows me knows I keep the door to my office open. It's symbolic of the way I choose to think, and it's the way I operate. My father was much the same. He once said to me, "You know, the more I learn, the more I realize I don't know." I think that has kept me young at heart more than anything else. It was an offhand comment, a quiet realization he mentioned to me one day while he was reading, but it has stuck with me for decades. Every day is a reminder to me of how much I don't know. Everything I learn leads me to something else I didn't know. Fortunately, I don't pride myself on being a know-it-all, so every day becomes a new challenge. People ask me what keeps me going, and this is probably the closest answer to the truth. If I end the day without knowing more than I did when I woke up, it makes me wonder. What did I miss out on today? Am I getting lazy? I'm a disciplined person, and this thought alone can get me going. We've all heard the phrase creature of habit. That can be good or bad, depending on your habits. I've cultivated the learning habit over the years, and it's one of the most pleasurable aspects of my life. Everyone in my family knows I'm big on education, not just Ivy League education, but all education, and for people of all ages. That also applies to me, and while I got very good grades at school, I do not have time to be a scholar. Still, it's something I aspire to in my quiet time. Possibilities unfold. The world opens up. My sister Mary Ann introduced me to the writings of Aldous Huxley. He was such a learner that when he was faced with a near-total blindness as a young man, he learned Braille and continued his studies anyway. His description of his predicament had not a trace of self-pity. In fact, he mentioned that it had offered some benefits. He could now read in bed at night, and his hands would never get cold because he could read with his hands under the covers. Learning begets learning. I'd rather be stimulated than passive. You can't wear a blindfold in business. A regular part of your day should be devoted to expanding your horizons. We live in a big world, and it's important for us to be aware of cultures other than our own. I have always lived in the United States, but I make an effort to be informed about other cultures. That's easy to do in New York City, the most diverse and exciting place on earth. Someone who had been living abroad for a few years told me upon returning home that a frequent comment about Americans is that you always know exactly where we're coming from. The flip side of this is that we rarely know where anyone else is coming from. We're very much up to snuff about our own national events, but we are less aware of what's happening in other countries. All of us need to pay more attention to events outside our own realm. We are connected to each other in so many ways, politically, commercially, socially. Perhaps one of the reasons I've been able to sell and rent apartments to people of so many foreign nationalities is that I've made an effort to understand where they're coming from. Learn something new, whether you think you're interested in it or not. That's the opposite of having a closed mind or a closed door. I can thank my father for the example he set. It was the key to his remaining young and dynamic into his 90s. It can do the same for you, if you make the effort. Think big and live large. This is the final rule of the Donald J. Trump School of Business and Management. Once you have mastered it, you are ready to graduate. It's a big world. There's a lot we don't know, which means there's still a lot to be discovered and a lot to be accomplished. The possibilities are always there. If you're thinking too small, you might miss them. In some ways, it's easier to buy a skyscraper than a small house in a bad section of Brooklyn. Either way, you'll probably need financing, and most people would rather invest in a great building than a dilapidated duplex on a dangerous street. With a skyscraper, if you hit, at least you hit big. And if you don't hit, what's the difference between losing $100,000 or hundreds of millions of dollars? Either way, you've lost, so you might as well have really gone for it. I've read stories in which I'm described as a cartoon, a comic book version of the big city business mogul, with a gorgeous girlfriend and the private plane and the personal golf course and the penthouse apartment with marble floors and gold bathroom fixtures. But my cartoon is real. I am the creator of my own comic book, and I love living in it. If you're going to think big. If you're going to live large. Part 2. Your Personal Apprenticeship. Career Advice from the Donald. Take control of the job interview. I've had some interesting experiences with job interviews over the years. Norma Forderer is a good example. I wasn't too sure about her after her first interview. It had nothing to do with her skills, but she seemed a little too prim, like she belonged on some family sitcom as the ever-so-proper type. I didn't think she could handle it here, or that she would fit with my style. Norma persisted, seeming to recognize a good match better than I did. Little did I know how deceptive first impressions could be. Norma was actually as far from fluff as you could get. So I thought, okay, maybe. Her abilities were superior to those of anyone else I had seen. As it turned out, I called her back on the same day her mother died, but Norma gave me an offer I couldn't refuse. She'd work for me for 1 month at a low salary just to see whether we clicked, no strings attached. I thought, aha, she'll never last anyway, and I can decide on someone else in the meantime. After 1 month with me, she'll be out of here for sure. The hoity-toity type just won't fly, except out the front door. Needless to say, I underestimated Norma completely. I was duly humbled, and I must add, grateful for being so. She was persistent and committed to getting the job, and she did it with elegance. Ask for your raise at the right time. When it comes to your career, certain moves should not be made without careful consideration of the old and very apt saying, timing is everything. For example, if you've decided to ask for a raise, look around first. So many times employees who I like very much do the dumbest things when it comes to conversations about their salaries. Jason Greenblatt, a young and brilliant lawyer who works for me, is terrific at everything he does. But one day, I swear, he must have been wearing blindfolds and earplugs. I was having an especially tough, vicious, terrible, miserable day that seemed never-ending to me and to everyone else. It was a grand slam rotten day. No one could possibly have mistaken it for anything else. Late in the afternoon, by which time I had had enough, I heard a polite knock on my door. I yelled, "What?" in my most exasperated tone. Jason nonchalantly entered my office, completely ignoring my angry welcome, and proceeded to ask me for a raise. I could not believe a lawyer as smart as Jason could make such a dumb move. I use his real name only because Jason knows how much I like and respect him, despite his incredible faux pas. But I have to tell you that I was ready to kill him. Was he joking? It's amazing, but he wasn't. He was dead serious. I couldn't believe it. Did he get a raise? Not that day. He almost got fired for stupidity, except that I told him to get out before I really lost my temper. I also told him that although he might be brilliant, his timing for certain things needed work, and that maybe he ought to start paying attention to what was going on around him. I remember thinking to myself, did I really hire such a person? But as I said, it had been a rough day. Jason is still with me, and he gets lots of raises because he's great at what he does. But now he always waits for sunny days, blue skies, and puffy white clouds on the horizon before approaching me. I told you he was smart. The best way to ask for a raise is to wait for the right time. It also indicates to your boss that you have a certain amount of discernment and appreciation for what he might be going through himself. I need my people to be plugged into what's going on with me. What impresses me most about people is their work ethic. A certain amount of swagger is okay. It's just another form of enthusiasm. But bottom line, I look for results. When I mentioned to a salesperson that I had to cut her salary because she'd made no sales in 9 months, she just about went nuts. But some things are common sense. What would she do if she had a non-productive salesperson on her roster? If you knew your company was scheduled to give a major client presentation at 3 p.m., would you approach your boss at 2:45 to ask for a raise? Money, like comedy, is all about timing. Be tenacious. The Art of the Deal contained a chapter called West Side Story, about my acquisition of the West Side Yards, a 100-acre property fronting the Hudson River, from 59th Street to 72nd Street. The chapter title was a deliberate double entendre, as I knew that the popular musical West Side Story had taken 10 years to put together. Its creative team had included no less than Leonard Bernstein, Jerome Robbins, Stephen Sondheim, and Arthur Lawrence, so whenever I experienced setbacks or delays on my West Side project, I would remind myself that I had some very illustrious company. It's now 17 years later, and it's still a work in progress. But the example set by the architects of West Side Story has served me well. You don't create a classic overnight. I'm calling it Trump Place. It's a $5 billion project, the biggest development ever approved by the New York City Planning Commission. When it's done, Trump Place will have 5,700 residential units and more than 5 million square feet of commercial space. So far, 4 towers have been completed and are occupied, and 2 additional buildings are under construction. When we're done, there will be a total of 16 buildings on the site. Trump Place is a good example of why tenacity is crucial in business. I bought the property in 1974. We've hit snags along the way and made many changes over time, but for more than 30 years, we've persisted. At times, just about every executive will appear impatient, but to build something that endures, you have to take the long view. Recently, an employee told me that the pastor of her church had used Trump Place as an example of what a firm foundation should be, whether it be in faith, family, or, as in my case, buildings. The pastor, whose church was near the construction site, would watch each building go up and marvel at the immensity of the work. Each building could be 100 stories high, he said, considering the meticulous foundation work. My publisher sent me an inspiring book by Bill Shore called The Cathedral Within, which celebrates the commitment and hope necessary to build something that endures. It might be a cathedral, like the one in Milan, which took 500 years to build, or it might be a community organization or a business. Paul Davis, the man developing Trump Place for me and my partners, is a true cathedral builder. I have rarely seen anyone work so hard or so diligently Saturdays, Sundays. He's there at all hours, paying close attention to every impeccable detail of the layouts, room sizes, and the quality of the fixtures. He's one of the big reasons for our success. Some things are worth waiting for. For me, Trump Place is one of those things. 16 beautifully designed buildings on the Hudson River, a 25-acre park, the Upper West Side as a backyard. This could prove to be my finest contribution to the city of New York. Time will tell, but I'm in no rush, and I won't stop until I'm done. Play golf. I made a lot of money on the golf course before I ever went into golf as a business. I found solutions to problems, new ideas for ventures, and even a new career. Golf has a way of giving you an equilibrium that you can't always find in the office. Doing what you love will always make you a winner. And after spending many happy hours on golf courses, I decided to build some of my own. I am now one of the busiest golf course developers in the United States, with 2 award-winning, internationally acclaimed courses fully operational, and 2 more in the works. My first course, the Trump International Golf Club in Palm Beach, Florida, has been home to the ADP LPGA Championships for 3 years. When I first decided to develop the most beautiful golf courses possible, I did some research and got in touch with the most respected designers in the business, the Fazio family. Just as Michelangelo had an affinity for sculpting marble, some people have an affinity for sculpting land. In this case, Jim and Tommy Fazio designed a dream come true for any golfer, not only visually, but in terms of playability. The course opened in 1999 with its waterfalls and landscapes unique to Florida. Trump International Golf Club is already a landmark course in the state, and the best course in Florida. My second course was Trump National at Briarcliff Manor in New York. We moved 3 million yards of earth, the largest land excavation ever in Westchester County, and it was worth it. We were also dealing with stone, which was used for walls, and a spectacular waterfall on the 13th hole, a 101-foot cliff of black granite quarried from the property, which pumps 5,000 gallons a minute. The walls were built by my very talented stonemason, Frank Sanzo. Membership costs $300,000. I think it's a bargain. My third golf course is Trump National Golf Club in a sumptuous area of New Jersey known as Bedminster. It is being designed by the master golf course architect himself, Tom Fazio. 3 times Golf Digest has named Fazio the best modern-day golf course architect. And when you see this course, you'll know why. It will be long, big, and beautiful, and I am involved daily in the design and construction. Additional plans for this property, formerly owned by automaker John DeLorean and located in the heart of New Jersey's horse country, will include a second course and a world-class clubhouse designed in the colonial mansion style. I don't want to limit my golfing to the East Coast, so in 2002, I bought a course along 2 miles of the Pacific Ocean. What was formerly known as Ocean Trails in Palos Verdes will now be known as Trump National Golf Club, Los Angeles. The course had fallen into disrepair under its previous owners. The 18th hole fell into the ocean, so I'm rebuilding it with legendary golf course architect Pete Dye. We're also planning to build luxury estate homes on the property. When completed, this course will be the best in California. When we announced the deal, the Los Angeles Times reported, "As he has so many times before, Trump has spotted a trend to tap." True, but mostly I was following my instincts and my interests. Building golf courses is not a big business for me, and it's unlikely that I will ever do another one. I only want the best. Sometimes I will sell memberships while I'm hitting balls on the practice range. People approach me and hand me checks. One recent day at my Florida course, a group of 4 wealthy friends came to me with checks of $300,000 each. I said to myself, not bad. I'm playing a game I love and going home with $1,200,000 in my pocket. I realize that some of you don't care much about golf. Golf is one of those things that has aficionados just as opera has die-hard fans who will fly around the world to catch a certain performance. To people who don't know or like opera, that seems absurd. I can't make you love golf, but believe me, once you've had the opportunity to play on a beautiful course, it could turn you into an enormous fan, or even a passionate player, no matter how poorly you hit the ball. If anyone had told me 20 years ago that I'd become a dedicated golf course developer, I would have sent them out of the room for being ridiculous. But golf has a transforming power. It's a brain game. Yes, there is skill and technique involved, but just as important, it requires concentration and assessment. It's a great way to improve your business skills, to learn how to maneuver. It can even be equated with learning how to negotiate, which is an art in itself. Golf is also, in essence, a solitary game. Being an entrepreneur, even within a large company, is a solitary game. Ultimately, the rule here is not just to visit one of my golf courses, though you would be wise to do so, but to turn your passion into profit. The results of that passion will reward you in more ways than you ever could have expected. Passion is enthusiasm on a big scale. It is all-encompassing and consuming. People with passion never give up because they'll never have a reason to give up, no matter what their circumstances may be. It's an intangible momentum that can make you indomitable. Take out the passion, and you will have a fizzle, or perhaps an okay product at best. Add the passion, and you will be in a rarefied realm that every other passionista will recognize, and one that every person would like to enter. A friend of mine is a member of what I call the Lucky Sperm Club, born into a wealthy family. He followed his father to Wall Street, but he was a total failure. He didn't like it, and he couldn't do it. Meanwhile, he became increasingly involved in his Connecticut Country Club. He was named the head of the Greens Committee and took on the lead role in rebuilding the golf course. He loved it and was great at it. The club held a dinner for him out of gratitude for his volunteer work. I asked him, "Why don't you do this for a living? You're not for Wall Street. You're getting eaten alive there." He told me his family wouldn't understand if he quit a serious job to work on golf courses. Well, 2 years later, he took my advice, quit the Wall Street job, and is now working full-time at renovating golf courses. He says he loves getting up in the morning, and he's doing better than ever. Of course, you don't have to learn how to play golf to have a satisfying career, but no matter what you do, you must be passionate about it. Brand yourself and toot your horn. I was originally going to call Trump Tower by another name, Tiffany Tower, for the famous jewelry store next door. I asked a friend, "Do you think it should be Trump Tower or Tiffany Tower?" He said, "When you change your name to Tiffany, call it Tiffany Tower." We've all seen the power of a brand name, especially quality brand names. Coco Chanel became world famous 80 years ago by naming her first perfume Chanel No. 5, and it's still going strong in a fiercely competitive market. Her fragrance, as well as her name, has become timeless. She proved that the right ingredients can create a legend. Trump has become a great brand name due to my rigorous standards of design and quality. We all admire Rolls-Royce cars, and I see every one of my ventures as being just that elite. Being a stickler has paid off, because my buildings are considered to be the finest in the world. That may sound like bragging, but it's also a fact. I've never been one to confuse facts with fiction. In 2003, Chicago Tribune real estate columnist Mary Umberger attributed the sales for Trump International Hotel and Tower in Chicago to the Trump factor. Umberger reported, "The sales velocity surprises even experienced real estate players, who told me at the sales inaugural that they doubted Trump would gain enough momentum because Chicago's luxury market was, and is, in a lull." Some people have written that I'm boastful, but they're missing the point. I believe in what I say, and I deliver the goods. If you're devoting your life to creating a body of work, and you believe in what you do, and what you do is excellent, you'd better damn well tell people you think so. Subtlety and modesty are appropriate for nuns and therapists, but if you're in business, you'd better learn to speak up and announce your significant accomplishments to the world. Nobody else will. When I'm setting the price for a luxury apartment, I consider a lot of factors: the market, the location, and the competition. Then I set my own standards. Once, when some top-of-the-line apartments weren't selling, I upped the prices, way over the competition. They started selling immediately. I view my work as an art form, and approach it with the same intensity and ego as any ambitious artist would. I never planned on becoming a brand name, but the fit of my aesthetic nature with each product I became involved with has resulted in an expanding network of interests. The success of the Trump name worldwide has been a surprise. It's been a good surprise. For example, using my name on a building carries with it a promise of the highest quality available, and at least a $5 million price tag. That's just for the name, because it will be worth it to the developers, and they know it. That building will be up to my standards. When I remember the line from Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, "What's in a name?" I have to laugh. What's in a name can be far more than either the bard or I ever could have imagined. We've all noticed the ascendancy of brand names and the power they have, from Levi's to Louis Vuitton. Some people are against this widespread branding, seeing it as another form of labeling. I see it as a viable outlet for creativity. If you're on the brink of success in your career, some snob might ask you dismissively, "You don't want to become a brand name, do you?" Anyone who asks you that does not have the big picture in focus, and they are usually just envious. I can get a project off the ground in no time now, whereas an unknown developer would require many months, if not years, to get something going. The number of people I employ to get a project finished reaches into the thousands, and those people would not have a building to work on without a developer to give them a job. Commerce and art cannot function independently. They must work together. That is the beauty of a successful brand name. If there is a downside to being a well-known name, it is that you become an easy target. The media needs to tear down what it builds up. That's just part of journalism. Stories are about heroes and villains, or success and failure. If you're a brand name, they're going to take a shot at you. It comes with the territory, and I've learned to live with it. As we say in The Apprentice, it's not personal, it's business. Fortunately, if you have the critics who matter on your side, reading the newspaper can be a lot of fun. Herbert Mouchamp, the architecture critic for the New York Times, is a scholar and an authority when it comes to buildings. To receive a compliment from him has an intrinsic value that will never diminish. When he wrote an article on Trump World Tower and described it as a handsome hunk of a glass tower, I was very honored. Here's more of what he wrote. Although Donald Trump prefers to publicize the aggressive side of his nature, it's the manly thing to do, he is also the only beauty freak at large in New York City real estate development. It's not surprising that unofficial approval of Trump's buildings should come by way of the Museum of Modern Art. The tower embodies the Miesian aesthetic through which the Modern's design department's taste was initially formulated. I hope Trump sticks with this material. Trump does better when he ignores his critics than when he pays attention to them. So don't be afraid to toot your own horn when you've done something worth tooting about. And don't believe the critics, unless they love your work. Go with your gut. Being an entrepreneur is not a group effort. You have to trust yourself. You may have superb academic credentials, but without instincts, you'll have a hard time getting to and staying at the top. This is one of those gray areas that remain an enigma even to those who have finely honed business instincts. There are inexplicable signs that can guide you to or away from certain deals and certain people. For example, within a few seconds of meeting Mark Burnett, the creator of The Apprentice, I knew he was 100% solid, both as a person and as a professional, which is a remarkable accomplishment in the entertainment industry. On the other hand, I've met people that I have an aversion to for no particular reason, and while I try not to be judgmental, I have reason by now to trust my gut. Carl Jung said our conscious minds use only 5% of our brain power for daily functioning. If we can learn to tap into that unconscious, subconscious, and dormant 95%, the results can be amazing. Be optimistic, but always be prepared for the worst. There are a lot of ups and downs, but you can ride them out if you're prepared for them. Learning to expect problems saved me from a lot of wasted energy, and it will save you from unexpected surprises. It's like Wall Street. It's like life. The ups and downs are inevitable, so simply try to be prepared for them. Sometimes I'll ask myself why I want to take on a new big challenge. A substantial loss is always a possibility. Can I handle it if it doesn't go well? Will I be asking myself later, why did I ever do that? What was I thinking? I'm actually a very cautious person, which is different from being a pessimistic person. Call it positive thinking, with a lot of reality checks. Look closely before changing careers. In 2000, I thought about running for President of the United States as a third-party candidate. I proposed some sensible ideas: tax cuts for the middle class, tougher trade deals, a ban on unregulated soft money in campaigns, comprehensive health care reform. I formed an exploratory committee and met with Reform Party leaders, but in the end I realized I was enjoying my business too much to run for office. Remember the rule I mentioned earlier about how you shouldn't equivocate? That may work for business, but in politics, you usually have to watch your words. I'm too blunt to be a politician. Then there's my long-held aversion to shaking hands. More on this in a moment. Had I entered the race, I wouldn't have been very popular. Even during the few months I was considering candidacy, I noticed that people began to treat me differently, in a more reserved, less friendly way. Before, I had been the Donald, someone they would wave and smile at. Suddenly, it was a different ballgame, and it didn't seem like much fun to me. One guy I had been friendly with for years saw me at Le Cirque, and for the first time in my life called me Mr. Trump. He'd always called me Donald. That was a real heads-up. A lot of successful business people think they can apply their management skills to politics, but I've noticed that only a select few, like Michael Bloomberg and John Corzine, succeed. Most others lack the temperament for it. There's a larger point here, beyond the obvious ones about not confusing your talent for office politics with a gift for electoral politics. Anyone with more than a little curiosity and ambition will at some point be tempted to try a different challenge on a new terrain. Take the risk, but before you do everything you can to learn what you're getting yourself into, and be as sure as you can that you've got the right mindset for the job. Avoid the handshake whenever possible. Some business executives believe in a firm handshake. I believe in no handshake. It is a terrible practice. So often I see someone who is obviously sick with a bad cold or the flu who approaches me and says, "Mr. Trump, I'd like to shake your hand." It's a medical fact that this is how germs are spread. I wish we could follow the Japanese custom of bowing instead. The worst is having to shake hands during a meal. On one occasion, a man walked out of the restaurant's bathroom jiggling his hands as though they were still wet, and he hadn't used a towel. He spotted me, walked over to my table, and said, "Mr. Trump, you're the greatest. Would you please shake my hand?" I knew that if I didn't shake his hand, he'd be saying terrible things about me for 30 years. I also knew that if I agreed, my own hands would be loaded with germs or whatever the hell he'd carried out of the bathroom. I had a choice. In this case, I decided to shake hands because I was a little overweight at the time and knew that if I shook his hand, I wouldn't eat my meal, and that would be a good thing. Pay attention to the details. If you don't know every aspect of what you're doing down to the paper clips, you're setting yourself up for some unwelcome surprises. I once read about an esteemed brain surgeon in San Francisco who was known for being fanatical about detail and organization. He would go over the components of an upcoming surgery in his head as he jogged every morning. He'd visualize every detail, as if to remind himself of everything he'd learned, every difficulty and complication he might encounter. He wasn't known for his bedside manner, but he was the best. If I had to have brain surgery, he's the kind of surgeon I'd choose. But you don't have to be a brain surgeon to pay attention to the details. Connect with your audience. The Art of Public Speaking, Part 1. One of the problems with my schedule lately is that I am unable to accommodate most of the requests I receive for public speaking. I happen to enjoy giving speeches. I know some people dread the thought of having to give a presentation in a boardroom, let alone appearing before thousands of people. Not me. I get so much energy from my audiences that it is always fun. I bet a lot of you are wondering whether I'm making that up to sound like, oh, I'm not afraid of anything. It's possible I'm forgetting a few stressful moments. Years ago, I was probably nervous about facing an audience, but I got over it. Being afraid of speaking in public is something you can conquer. The following pointers can be applied by people who find presentations, whatever the size of the audience, to be a roadblock on their highway to success. It helps if you are a naturally gregarious person. My driver, Tony, recalls a time when I was going to deliver a speech. When we were about 5 minutes away, I asked Tony what I was supposed to be talking about that night. Tony couldn't hide his shock. He said, "Boss, don't you know? There are 20,000 people waiting for you." I said, "Yeah, but I've been busy. I'm sure it will be okay." I was trying to reassure him. "No go." He said, "Where are your notes? Didn't you make any notes?" I said, "I'm making some now." Tony was looking at me through the rearview mirror with an expression of astonishment. I think he was checking to see whether I was kidding. I wasn't. I'd been asked to give the speech by Anthony Robbins, the best-selling author and self-help guru. I had been paid a great deal of money for the speech, but I'd never asked how many people I would be speaking in front of. As I was leaving the office to go to Philadelphia, my secretary told me I would be speaking at a basketball arena, the Wachovia Center, and that there would be approximately 20,000 people there. I said, "You got to be kidding. I've never spoken before 20,000 people before." That situation could cause panic in some people. Instead, I thought about my audience not as a massive group of people just waiting to judge me, but as individuals who might be there because they're interested in something. Then I started thinking about what people are interested in and the kinds of questions people like to ask me. I was ready. I suddenly had a gut feeling that we were all in for a great time. Leaving an ashen-faced Tony in the car, I hopped out, ready to embrace the experience. Somehow the audience picked up on my energy and got much more than a speech. They got give and take that no one who was there will soon forget. We had a hilarious time, and we walked away having learned a few things as well. Tony Robbins turned out to be a terrific guy. Until I met him, I didn't believe in him or trust him, but that was only because I was getting my information secondhand. Having gotten to know him and his wife, I now wholeheartedly endorse him. He is out to do good and help people. His seminars are absolutely a happening, and after our successful experience in Philadelphia, I agreed to make 10 more appearances. All in all, it was a valuable lesson in public speaking. Think about your audience first. The rest will fall into place. Granted, having useful information to convey will help too. But tuning into people is the first step. I'm good at that, and I don't have to try too hard. Even in my office, with a few people around, the conversation will never be one-sided. I like to involve everyone and hear what they have to say. So, involve your audience. They will appreciate being included. Cover these 11 bases. The Art of Public Speaking, Part 2. When you're speaking, it helps to be prepared. That may sound funny after what I've just told you, but if you read every day, you will already be prepared. Maybe not for the fine points you are specifically speaking about, but usually we are asked to speak about something we are experts at, or at least familiar with. Cover your bases mentally. Imagine yourself being in the audience. What are you looking for? Being able to trade places with the audience can open you up to a lot of ideas. Have examples and references in mind to back up your statements, and make them as vivid as possible for your listeners. Notes can sometimes function as a useful reference point, especially if you're speaking to a large audience. If you're prepared, no one can tell that you're using them. Ideally, you don't want to read a speech. For some reason, no matter how good your delivery is, when you read a speech, it's usually boring. Everyone sees that you're reading it, and it's never quite the same as delivering it off the cuff. Notes offer the best of both worlds. They keep you focused and moving in the right direction without turning you into a stiff. Be a good storyteller. People like stories, and they'll remember them. A speech shouldn't become a lecture. Humor goes a long way, and it will remind you and everyone else that we've all got a lot of things in common. Storytelling is a skill, so work on it. It's helpful to listen to comedians. The good ones can teach you the art of great timing. Think about the common denominator. How can all of us relate to one another? How can you enable your audience to relate to you and to what you're saying? People see me as a rich and powerful person, but like most people, I also have a daily routine and a family. I get stuck in traffic jams, too. I've known some real gems and some real wackos. I have cranky moments and bad days like everyone else. A lot of your experiences can be understood and appreciated by your audience because they've had them, too. Look for what you have in common and lead with it. You will create an immediate bond because they will realize they can relate to you. When you are on the podium, you are the entertainer. People are there to learn something, but also to be entertained. One reason Elvis Presley was such a great entertainer is that he made every effort to tune in to his audience. It was give and take all the way. Wayne Newton does that too. Even people who thought they wouldn't like Liberace became big fans after experiencing his live shows, and nobody did it better than Sinatra. Some people call it charisma. I call it tuning in and delivering. Study Regis Philbin. He is relaxed and funny, and he always relates to his audiences. They love him. He's a perfect example of the give and take that's necessary for successful public speaking. Regis doesn't just speak, he shares. He's as magnanimous a performer as he is a person. Watch him, pay attention, and you'll learn a lot. Be able to poke fun at yourself. This will make you accessible to people even if you are up on the stage and in the spotlight. We've all had disasters in our lives, major and minor. To be able to laugh at them in retrospect is healthy and helpful. Use the blips that we all encounter in our lives to your advantage. I remember a particular question and answer period that followed one of my speeches, during a time when Ivana and I were going through our divorce and the tabloids were having a field day. The first question was from a guy who asked, "You don't mind if I call you the Donald, do you?" So I responded, "Well, not if you don't mind if I call you Ivana." We all had a good laugh and then proceeded to his real question. Learn to think on your feet. Memorable public speaking involves a good deal of spontaneity. It's a lot like negotiating. You have to focus on your goals, but remain flexible. A lot of people are terrific writers, but not so great at getting their ideas across orally. Writing is a form of thinking, and so is speaking. The difference is that you don't have time to go back and correct yourself when you're on stage. It's not a first draft, and it's not a rehearsal. Be prepared for the performance, because that's what's expected of you. Listen in your daily life. Every day can be a preparation for a speech or a presentation. Have you ever said to yourself, "I'll have to remember that one," after hearing someone say something particularly clever or unusual? Even offhand comments that you overhear can be useful. Remember them. Make notes if you must. Everything and everyone can become material. I was in the back of an elevator once behind a group of guys. Their conversation was so vivid, so real, that I tuned in and tried to figure out why they'd captured my attention. Aside from the fact that they had a captive audience for a short amount of time, I realized that their speaking rhythm was syncopated, quick, and to the point. What they were saying wasn't all that fascinating, but their delivery was. They made a normally mundane subject, what they were getting for lunch and how they were getting it, seem interesting. Have a good time. It's contagious. If your audience believes you are enjoying what you're doing, they'll enjoy being in your company. If it's an obvious chore to you, forget it and find someone else to speak for you. If you're a busy executive, there's probably someone within your organization who can speak effectively in your place. Sometimes when I'm asked to speak and my schedule won't allow it, I will ask someone who works for me if they'd be interested in filling in. Charlie Reese, Executive Vice President of Development in my organization, was a professor at Columbia University before he came to work for me. He's a dynamic speaker, but I wouldn't have known this if I hadn't asked him to help out when I was in a bind. He has a gift for public speaking because he enjoys teaching and is enthusiastic about what he does. At first, I worried he might turn out to be a bit pedantic, considering his background, but he wasn't. Everyone had a good time. Another important aspect of having a good time, before you speak, remind yourself that it doesn't matter all that much. Don't feel that the weight of the world is on you. Most of the people in the room don't care how well or poorly you do. It's just not that important. It's merely a speech, not an earthquake or a war. You'll have a better time and be a better speaker if you keep it all in perspective. That said, public speaking and presentations may be a necessary step on your ladder to success. For quick reference, here's my procedure for discovering a talent you thought you didn't have. Number 1, think about your audience first. Number 2, get your audience involved. Number 3, be prepared. Number 4, be a good storyteller. Number 5, be aware of the common denominator. Number 6, be an entertainer. Number 7, be able to laugh at yourself. Number 8, think on your feet. Number 9, listen. Number 10, have a good time. And of course, number 11, study Regis Philbin. Change your altitude. When I say altitude, I'm not referring to my jet. It's my own interpretation of the word attitude. I like flying because it gets me where I'm going fast. Likewise, if you have the right attitude, you can get where you're going fast. What's the altitude of your attitude? Is it high frequency or low frequency? Having a high frequency will attune you to a wavelength that exudes confidence and a clear-sighted enthusiasm. I'm a firm believer that this is half the battle of any enterprise. I'm a tough-minded optimist. I learned a long time ago that my productivity was increased by a large percentage simply by learning to let go of negativity in all forms as quickly as I could. My commitment to excellence is thorough, so thorough that it negates the wavelength of negativity immediately. I used to have to zap negativity mentally. By now, it just bounces off me within a moment of getting near me. As you may have heard, I don't like germs. I'm still waging a personal crusade to replace the mandatory and unsanitary handshake with the Japanese custom of bowing. To me, germs are just another kind of negativity. Negativity is also a form of fear, and fear can be paralyzing. On the golf course, I've heard great athletes tell me that they can't putt. They can hit a ball 300 yards right down the middle of the fairway, but they can't finish the hole by putting the ball 3 feet into the cup. Recently, I played with a man who was terrified of putting. He hit a magnificent 235-yard shot and was 7 feet from the cup. Then he looked over at me and said, "Now the hard part begins." Another friend, also a great golfer, is paralyzed by his fear of losing his ball. Each time we played a hole near a lake, he would look down and say to his ball, "I have a feeling I'll never see you again." I have told these guys that they must start thinking positively, or they will sabotage themselves. Very often, negative thinking stems from low self-esteem. You have to work on this yourself. Maybe you've received a lot of hard knocks. I've learned to deal with them because I get knocked a lot. Quickly see them for what they are, knocks. But you don't have to open the door unless you choose to. I've gotten to the point where I see knocks as opportunities and as an insight into whoever is doing the knocking. One way to chase low altitude away is to think about how fortunate you already are and how much you still have to look forward to. You can better your best day at any time. Very surprising things can happen, but you must, and I repeat, must, be open to them. How can you fly if you've already clipped your own wings? I don't have time to encourage as many people as I would like to, but whenever it seems appropriate, I recommend The Power of Positive Thinking by Norman Vincent Peale, one of my father's favorite books, and mine too. Some people may think it's old-fashioned, but what Peale has written will always be true. He advocates faith over fear. Faith can overcome the paralysis that fear brings with it. I can remember a time when I had a choice to make, when I was billions of dollars in debt. I had to take one of two courses of action, a fearful, defensive one, or a faithful, riskier one. I carefully analyzed the situation, realized what was causing the uneasy feeling of fear, and immediately replaced it with blind faith, simply because I had nothing else to go on at the time. Then I resolved that as long as I remained positive and disciplined, things would work out. There was not much more I could do. I didn't know how it was going to go, but I was determined to move forward, even though it wasn't easy. Within a relatively short amount of time, the situation was settled positively. I learned a lot from that and have since had a better understanding of what courage really is. Without facing my own fear, I would not have known. When I think of someone who is tough, I also think of someone who has courage. People who persist have courage, because often it's a lot easier to give up. Some of the bravest people I've met are children with handicaps. I'm active with United Cerebral Palsy. What those kids deal with is humbling, but they are enthusiastic and thrilled with every day they've been given. You've been given a day, too. When you're down, look at it that way. Another day can equal another chance. Sometimes, as obvious as it sounds, we really do have to take things one day at a time. Immediately after the events of September 11th, we didn't know what was going to happen, but we all kept going, one day at a time, and we're still moving forward. Maybe you've gotten to the point where you think you can't get through another day. That's short-sighted of you. You're missing the big picture. You're on the runway, but your fuel supply is the problem. You won't get off the ground without it. Feed yourself some positive thoughts, and you can take off at any time. Ever wonder what makes certain people keep going? I do. Abraham Lincoln encountered a steady procession of setbacks, but he just kept at it. Nothing deterred him. He must have had a lot of faith because he didn't receive much encouragement along the way. He's an excellent example of someone who never gave up. The other extreme is a person who seems to run into obstacles with the unerring aim of a marksman. I knew a guy who was remarkably accident-prone. If there was something to run into, he'd find it. If there was a hole in the ground, he'd break his foot by stumbling into it. Once he was in such a slam-bang accident that he was hospitalized for 6 months before being completely patched up. Finally, the day of his release from the hospital arrived, and it was decided that he should get an ambulance ride home just to be on the safe side. As the ambulance was taking him home, it crashed into a car. Another spectacular slam-bang accident. My friend was immediately brought back to the hospital in a new ambulance dispatched to the scene of the disaster. What can I say? Maybe he's just a really unlucky guy. Or maybe he's a loser. I know that sounds harsh, but let's face it. Some people are losers. The altitude level of losers is so low that they should walk around in scuba gear all day. They are below sea level on the altitude map. We all know people like that, and they might make great comedians because they have so much material, but first they'd have to learn to be funny. Honestly, I've known people who are such accomplished losers that I think that's what they devote their time to. How can I be the biggest screw-up possible? How can I prove the born loser theory to be correct? How can I defy the law of probability to make it an absolute disaster every time? How can I achieve a perfect record of total wipeouts? How far can I get at 0 miles per hour? How can I reach the lowest frequency possible? How can I operate so that radar could never possibly find me even if I get lost, which I probably will? These people need a new speedometer. Get going, move forward, aim high, plan for a takeoff. Don't just sit on the runway and hope someone will come along and push the airplane. It simply won't happen. Change your attitude and gain some altitude. Believe me, you'll love it up here. Start visualizing positively. Positive thoughts will create positive visuals. Have you ever heard someone say, "I can just see it," when they are enthusiastic about something? I know from experience that if I can see something as a possibility, it has a much better chance of happening than if I can't see it happening. Give your higher self a chance once in a while by giving your possibility quota a boost. Keep a book of inspiring quotes nearby so you can change a negative wavelength the moment it descends on you. Here are some of my personal favorites. Know everything you can about what you're doing. My father, Fred Trump. I know the price of success: dedication, hard work, and an unremitting devotion to the things you want to see happen. Frank Lloyd Wright. A leader has a right to be beaten, but never the right to be surprised. Napoleon. Let's avoid subtlety on this one. Charles Reese, Executive Vice President of Development, the Trump Organization. He who looks outside his own heart dreams. He who looks inside his own heart awakens. Carl Jung. Exciting is a dull word for the business we're in. Fred Trump. You're the only guy who can wear a cashmere overcoat to a baseball game and get away with it. Regis Philbin. Imagination is more important than knowledge. Albert Einstein. Continuous effort, not strength or intelligence, is the key to unlocking our potential. Winston Churchill. I remember when I was the Donald Duck. Read Carl Jung. I find reading psychology and self-help books useful. Carl Jung's theories fascinate me and keep my mind open to my own and the collective unconscious. Reading his books can also be a good form of self-defense. There's a lot we don't know about ourselves. Likewise, there's a lot we may not know about everyone else. Jung used the word psyche to refer to both the conscious and the unconscious processes. That's where the word psycho comes from, by the way. I first became aware of Jung through an acquaintance who had endured some extreme ordeals. Yet he remained calm. I couldn't fathom where he got this sort of grace under fire demeanor, so I asked him, and he told me that Jung's ideas kept him centered. My friend put it like this: Donald, I've learned from my experiences. As a safety factor, I very often see other people as a revolver that could be pointed at me. They are the gun. I, however, am the trigger. So I speak and tread carefully. It's an effective visual aid to avoid conflicts, as I was unwittingly among people who were actually psychos underneath their dignified personas. We never know what will trigger another person's killer instinct. It can be something that happened when they were 5 years old. So avoid being the trigger, and the revolver will not be a threat. This synopsis of his philosophy made such an impact on me that I immediately started reading about Carl Jung. I'm glad I did, because it helped me in my business as well as in my personal life. We are all evolving human beings, and being aware of this gave me a big boost toward maturity. It also made me less inclined to be surprised by so-called aberrant behavior. I have to stress that I am not cynical, but I am aware. I hate being in situations where I'm asking myself, how could this have happened? This reminds me of my favorite quote from Napoleon about being surprised. A good leader shouldn't be. You have to know yourself as well as know other people to be an effective leader. For me, reading the work of Carl Jung was a step in the right direction. If someone had told me in business school that studying psychology would be important for financial success, I would not have believed it. My friend's story changed that, and I am grateful for him for such cogent advice. The relatively small number of hours I've spent reading Jung have been more than worth it. Start with his autobiography, Memories, Dreams, Reflections, and you will be in for a fascinating time while simultaneously fine-tuning your intuition and instincts. You will also gain a technique for seeing into versus reading into the people around you. Believe me, this will serve you well on many levels. The word persona has an interesting root. It comes from the Latin word meaning mask. This, however, is not derogatory. It's necessary. Each of us has a persona. We need it for survival. It's the face we put on for public use, and it can be intentional or unconscious. For example, a salesman who has lost his entire family in an accident is naturally devastated. But to work effectively with his customers, he must appear cheerful and confident. That's part of his persona. It's a survival device. The only danger is when people become their personae. That means something has been shut off somewhere along the line, and these people will end up hiding behind the false personality that works professionally. As I am very much in the public eye, this hit home, and I gave it considerable thought. Fortunately, I am aware of my public side as well as my private side, and while I'm not one for hiding much, I know there are several dimensions in which I operate. That's one reason I feel at home at the Trump Organization. The people I work with day in and day out know I'm not entirely a glam guy. They see how hard I work. One person said, "I am very much like a Mormon," which I took as high praise. Anyway, reading Jung will give you insights into yourself and the ways in which you and other people operate. Have an ego. As you know, this rule has been easy for me to follow. But hear me out. I've got a good reason for it. Having a well-developed ego, contrary to popular opinion, is a positive attribute. It is the center of our consciousness and serves to give us a sense of purpose. I remember saying to someone, "Show me someone with no ego, and I'll show you a big loser." I was trying to stir things up and provoke a reaction, but I later realized the basic idea is on target. The ego works to keep our conscious and unconscious aspects in balance. Too much either way can be detrimental. No ego means very little life force, and too much means a dictatorial personality. Keep your ego in a healthy balance, for your own well-being as well as for those around you. Strive for wholeness. It's an intelligent approach to life and business. Understanding how egos work can be a great tool. Did you ever notice how you can deflate an opponent by simply saying, "Yeah, whatever you say"? By doing this, you are gently assuming a no-ego position, which disarms the other person while at the same time taking the wind out of their sails. It gives you the peace of mind necessary to allow you to concentrate on something more important than dealing with someone who is playing God. Sometimes, rather than confronting a tyrant or a psycho directly, it's more effective to keep the knowledge to yourself and proceed accordingly behind the scenes. We've all heard the saying that knowledge is power. The intelligent use of that power is crucial in the business world, and it's just as important in your personal life. Your mind can build castles. Just make sure the foundations are in place first. You and the people around you will be grateful for that. Keep critics in perspective. In any job, you will be criticized at some point. Let's face it, nobody but a total masochist wants to be criticized. There is constructive criticism, and then there is destructive criticism. Here's how to assess both types. Number one, first of all, consider the source. Should this person's opinion even matter to you? Number two, if it does matter to you, take a few minutes to consider whether anything helpful can result from the criticism. Others can often see things that we have overlooked. Use their keen eyes to your advantage. Number three, critics serve their purpose. Sometimes they serve a larger purpose, and sometimes they serve their own purpose. American Idol judge Simon Cowell can be critical of the performers on the program, but he's fair, and he's honest, and I don't think American Idol would work without him. Simon was nice enough to compliment The Apprentice in an interview. "I think it's absolutely fantastic," he told the Daily News. "I think Trump is superb on the show. He's not hamming it up. He's just playing himself, and that's very hard to do on television." As I said, Simon is a fair and honest critic, and I am a fan of his. Number four, everyone has an opinion. In most cases, it's not worth the paper it's written on. Number five, if the opinion is worth the paper it's written on, and it's written in a paper people are buying and reading, then realize that if people didn't find you interesting enough for public consumption, they wouldn't be taking the time to criticize you. Think of their criticism as a compliment, proof of your significance. Homework is required, and there will be a test. People who think achieving success is a linear A to Z process, a straight shot to the top, simply aren't in touch with reality. There are very few bona fide overnight success stories. It just doesn't work that way. Success appears to happen overnight because we all see stories in newspapers and on TV about previously unknown people who suddenly become famous. But consider a sequoia tree that has been growing for several hundred years. Just because a television crew one day decides to do a story about that tree doesn't mean it didn't exist before. In 1955, Glenn Gould, the classical pianist from Toronto, rocketed to international fame by recording Bach's Goldberg Variations. He was young and unusual, but he had already been practicing the piano for close to 20 years. He may have seemed like an overnight sensation to the general public, but anyone who's been working at something for 20 years isn't likely to agree with that assessment. I have to admit that my knowledge of classical music is limited, but from what little I've read on the subject, I know that the process of becoming a classical musician is a long and demanding one. The amount of practice hours required to master an instrument is astounding, and also never-ending. How do they do it? I'm not sure, but I would guess that passion plays a large part. Every industry and profession has its bottom line for what is required to succeed. If you can't stand to practice every day, being a musician is out of the question. If you hate to exercise, being an athlete is not for you. In business, every business, the bottom line is understanding the process. If you don't understand the process, you'll never reap the rewards of the process. You'll never last long enough to achieve your overnight success. Part of the process is doing your homework. You have to know what you're getting into first. That was one of my father's strongest beliefs. We've all heard the phrase, "You're barking up the wrong tree." It brings to mind a funny image, but in reality, it can be embarrassing. Not doing your homework can result in something analogous, so do a few things first to avoid this. We can learn from our mistakes, but it's better to learn from our successes. When I hear people say, "Well, it was an interesting experience," I can usually safely assume they were referring to something that didn't work out the way they'd planned. I don't find my goof-ups to be amusing or interesting. Can you imagine hearing a surgeon say, "Well, it didn't go quite right, but I sure learned a lot"? I wouldn't want that guy operating on me. The same applies to anyone in business, because if you're in business, it's not just your money involved, but very often the money and well-being of others as well. In my business, I can't take chances. If something is not quite right with the design or construction of a superstructure, a lot of people could be injured or killed. I've got to know what's going on. Bottom line, it will be my responsibility. People see the finished product. Wow, a skyscraper. What goes into it is another story. Construction isn't glamorous. It's a serious and often dangerous endeavor. Fortunately, I understood this from my earliest days in the business, so there's a certain gravity in my approach to the construction of any building. That's where having learned to do my homework comes in handy. It's a necessary requirement, not an extracurricular course to enhance my productivity. Not only do I have to know exactly what I'm doing, but I've also got to make sure I find contractors who know exactly what they're doing as well. That's why I'm tough on them, and that's why I'm equally tough on myself. A lot of lives are at stake at our work. We don't want any interesting experiences. We all know what it's like to pretend to study. There are some courses in school that just don't hold your attention. If you are choosing a career, keep that in mind. What most holds your attention? Consider a pyramid. Did you ever notice how large and solid the foundation is? Did you notice the carefully graduated levels that eventually lead to the pinnacle? Now turn the pyramid upside down. That's a representation of topsy-turvy thinking. You don't start at the top. You start with the foundation. The stronger, the better. The world moves along at such a fast clip that we have little patience when things are slow, whether it's the line at a supermarket or internet access. We become intolerant of those things that cannot be accelerated or skipped entirely. I can't speed up the foundation work for a building, nor can I expect to play piano like Glenn Gould just because I want to. Know the limitations as well as the possibilities of everything you do. Find out as much as you can yourself about what you plan to do, and don't expect anyone to act as your favorite grandmother in wanting what's best for you. Most people want what's best for themselves, not for you. If those people have already spent a great deal of effort on their homework, why should they share it with you? Listen to a ping-pong game. I learned a long time ago not to just listen, but to listen judiciously. You can learn a lot from the people around you. You just have to be discerning about the information that comes your way. A lot of the so-called information I receive turns out to be someone's personal opinion. We're all entitled to our 2 cents worth, but sometimes that's all it amounts to. Be aware of the marketplace. Know what's going on now. That's one of the reasons I devote several hours a day to reading. That's how long it takes to both keep up with current events and learn from the greats in history. How can you expect to be successful if your idea of what's happening in the world is vague or non-existent? It's like saying, I know that September 11th happened, but I choose not to acknowledge it. It gets in the way of my positive outlook on things. That approach is fine if you're a professional fairy tale writer. There's another side to everything, so develop your ability to see it or even hear it. I once met a young woman from Hong Kong who worked on Wall Street in emerging markets. She had an uncanny ability to predict certain events in the marketplace. It seemed almost like a psychic gift to me. One day I asked her how she could be so on target in her work, and she likened knowing and predicting the global markets to listening to a ping-pong game. At first I thought she was joking or perhaps just being evasive, but she went on to explain her theory. I'm not kidding you, Donald. When I was growing up, we had a ping-pong table in the den, and I could hear the games my brothers would play, sometimes for hours, when I was studying in my room. I discovered that I could discern the tilt of the paddle and the outcome of the volley just by the sound of the ping-pong ball being hit and the sound of it landing on the other side of the net. I knew the results, the repercussions, and the recovery that would be required to successfully handle what had been dealt. Later I applied this to my work in emerging markets and found I could often predict what would be happening just by concentrating on world events and thinking of the sound of ping-pong balls being hit around the globe. Ping-pong is really the reason behind my success. I was astounded. That's my idea of tuning in. I must add that this young woman had all the education in finance that her position required. She was a bright student. What set her apart from everyone else was the way she applied her knowledge and her keen analysis of the game of ping-pong to her work. She may even have done this on an unconscious level initially, but tapping into this resource gave her an uncanny edge. The lesson I learned from her story is never to underestimate the power of awareness. Find out what other people have done to succeed, and then be prepared to do 10 times more. There are no guarantees. Comparing ourselves to others is a waste of time. I've heard people say, well, Mr. Lucky had $1 million before he was 30, and I've worked just as hard as he has. Well, Mr. Lucky has nothing to do with you, your possibilities, your success, or your failure. Don't let anyone else be your yardstick. That's taking power away from yourself in a big way. You've got your own personal blueprint to attend to. We can't all be Tiger Woods, J-Lo, Bill Gates, or whoever it is you would like to be, and sometimes that's a hard fact to face. You may have already experienced defeat. That happens. It happens a lot. But the fact that you have aspirations to begin with is putting you on the road to success right now. No matter how defeated you may feel, you've still got a chance. But it won't happen by itself. Get to work. I'll sum up with 2 of my favorite quotes. There are no shortcuts to anywhere worth going. Beverly Sills. The harder I work, the luckier I get. Gary Player. Reflect for 3 hours a day. I read an article recently in which European exchange students living in the United States all agreed on one aspect of American life. The noise level here is very high. We seem to avoid quiet moments. Even lapses in conversations are quickly filled with banter or some kind of interference. It made me realize how much I need a certain amount of quiet time, usually about 3 hours a day, in order to stay balanced. It's time I use to read and reflect, and I always feel renewed and refreshed by this. It also gives me material to feed my extroverted nature. For me, the early morning hours are best for this kind of reflection. I'm an early riser, usually up by 5 a.m., which gives me a few hours to read newspapers and magazines of all sorts, local, national, and international. In the evening, after a black-tie dinner, I'll unwind by stopping at my local Korean grocery for snacks, potato chips, and pretzels. That will be my dinner. I rarely get to eat at those black-tie events, and I'd rather have the junk food anyway. Once I'm home, I read books, usually biographies. Now and then I like to read about philosophers, particularly Socrates, who emphasizes that you should follow the convictions of your conscience, which basically means thinking for yourself, a philosophy I tend to agree with. It may not make you too popular, but it's essential for lucid thought, and it's a good way to avoid being part of a herd mentality of any sort. I read as much as I can, but not as much as I'd like, because there are so many constraints on my time. I'm grateful for the contribution Oprah Winfrey has made to our country in regard to reading. In my book, The America We Deserve, I wrote about the deplorable state of reading in this country. Since Oprah decided to do something about it, there has been a noticeable upswing in book sales, and writers are once again considered to be cool people rather than dinosaurs. I cannot thank Oprah enough for what she has done, and I hope every person in this country realizes the positive influence she has had. We all owe Oprah a big thank you, and I'd like to lead the crowd in saying so. I like movies and television as much as anyone else, but reading is a form of replenishment for me. The potato chips and pretzels help too. Dress for your culture. I used to pride myself in buying very inexpensive suits and other clothing. It just didn't make sense to pay thousands of dollars for great clothes when you could buy something for $100. Who would know the difference? Over the years, I've learned that this is wrong-headed. I now buy very high-quality shoes, and they seem to last forever, whereas the cheapos used to wear out quickly and always looked as cheap as the price I'd paid for them. The same is true for suits. These days, I go for Brioni, whose service and attention to detail is second to none. They supply most of the clothing for The Apprentice, so I have tremendous loyalty to them, and I got a good deal. They also make great overcoats. The way we dress says a lot about us before we ever say a word. To me, dressing successfully means understanding your environment, knowing the culture, and making an effort to reflect and respect it. The look in Beverly Hills may be attractive, but that same look may be met with scorn on Wall Street. Success is hard enough to achieve without showing up on Casual Friday in a three-piece suit. Don't put up unnecessary hurdles for yourself. Make it easy for people to take you seriously. I would wonder about someone who arrived for a meeting or an interview and was dressed inappropriately for the culture of that particular workplace. For example, a guy showing up at Trump Tower in a cowboy hat, boots, and a fringed cowhide jacket. It's more about culture than style. Be aware of your surroundings and dress accordingly. Some people can get away with anything. Most people can't. Misha Koppel, who works at the Trump Organization, usually looks like a Canadian Mountie in full regalia. To look at him, you'd think he was about to lead an expedition through the Rockies. Then again, my buildings are tall, and he scouts the right locations for them, so maybe there's a reason for his get-ups. It works for him, and he does a good job, so I don't mind. It's certainly not groundbreaking news that the early victories by the women on The Apprentice were, to a very large extent, dependent on their sex appeal. The fact that sex sells is nothing new. However, women are judged harshly when they go too far, so be careful in how you present yourself. If you want to be acknowledged for your intelligence as well as your beauty, don't stand in your own way. Not everyone can tune out a knock-'em-dead appearance. Think of how you would like to be perceived, and proceed from there. I tend to notice what people are wearing only if they look exceptionally well put together, or exceptionally badly put together. It has more to do with style than which designer they may or may not be wearing. As I said, expensive clothing usually looks like it was worth the price. Have you ever noticed how we tend to pigeonhole people in certain professions by their appearance? It's a form of shorthand to just be able to say your basic accountant type or a typical advertising type when describing someone. Every profession has a certain look or standard. Just say banker and you've saved yourself 100 words. It's not always fair, but that's how it works. However, you don't have to be a typical anything. For example, Frank McKinney looks like a cross between a rock star and a surfer dude. You would never guess by looking at him that he's a real estate entrepreneur who sells ultra-high-end residential real estate in Florida. When he speeds by you on his motorcycle in his Versace vest, with his 2 feet of blonde hair blowing in the wind, you can bet he's on his way to a business meeting. But that's Frank's style, and he's very successful. I'm a conservative dresser due to business considerations and to save time. I enjoy flamboyance in other people. I'm more interested in what a beautiful woman might wear than in anything I might ever put on. Be aware that your attire can literally become a costume. I've known a lot of terrific-looking scoundrels and a lot of well-dressed bums. Being tasteful is being tasteful, no matter what line of work you're in. Sure, it helps to have the money to buy great clothes, but a little style can go a long way.